Hi, and welcome to my fifth video in my Chess Basics series. Last time we looked at how the bishop moves and captures. This time we will take a look at how the knight moves and captures. So let's get started. We have two knights, and so does our opponent. And as you can see, they are situated on the back rank and very close to the edge of the board. They usually come into play very quickly. Now, for the beginner player, this piece is the one which you will probably use most time on when figuring out how it moves. But when you get the hang of it, it is just as simple as the other pieces. Let's take a look and bear with me. For the sake of this tutorial, I am placing the kings in the corner and only displaying the white knight. Okay, here goes. When the knight moves, it can move 2 squares horizontally and 1 square vertically, or 2 squares vertically and 1 square horizontally. Sound difficult? Well, let's start drawing some arrows. So let's move the knight 2 squares horizontally and then 1 square vertically, and that can be either up or down. And that places the knight either here or here. Now we can also move the knight 2 squares horizontally the other way, and then vertically 1 square up or 1 square down, and that places the knight either here or here. We can also move the knight vertically 2 squares and then 1 square horizontally either to the left or to the right, placing the knight on these 2 squares. And we can move the knight vertically the other way 2 squares and then horizontally either to the left or to the right, placing the knight here or here. It moves kind of like in an L shape, and even though it doesn't slide along the board and cover diagonals and horizontal lines or vertical lines, it does cover a few squares. One thing to take into consideration is that the closer the knight is to the edge of the board, the less squares it is dominating. Right now it has influence on 8 squares. If we move the knight to g3, we see that that number is reduced. It has now influence over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. And if we move the knight all the way into the corner, it has only influence over these 2 squares. There are a few sayings about this. A knight on the rim is grim, or a knight on the rim is dim. So the closer to the center of the board that the knight is placed, it has more influence, and in the beginning of the game that can be very important. Let's talk a little bit about how the knight captures. As we saw a little earlier, the knight can move 2 squares horizontally and then either 1 square vertically up or down, and that places the knight either here on c3 or c5. So in this position it cannot take the pawn here on c4. How about the other pawns? Can we take them? Well, we see that our knight here, if it moves 2 squares vertically up, it can move either 1 square to the left or to the right horizontally. So we can take this pawn here, and we can also take this pawn here. And we know that it moves horizontally also, and 1 square vertically up or down. So yes, it can take this pawn. But if we do that, as we know from earlier tutorial, this pawn can just take our knight, so we're not going to do that. Let's discuss this pawn here on c4. As we saw, our knight can move in front of it on c3. It can also move behind it on c5. Not that we necessarily would do that. For those that know how the pawn moves, this pawn here can now take this knight. But this is to prove a point. And the point is this. If we're moving horizontally here, we're actually moving into the path of the pawn, and we're not taking it. And the reason for that is, as the other pieces are, let's say, sliding along the board, the knight jumps. So we're actually jumping over this pawn here to land on either c3 or c5. A slightly different example, but still proving the same point. We are able, with the knight, to take the pawn on d6 and the pawn on f6, but we are not able to take the pawn on e6 because we're actually jumping over it to get to the other two neighboring squares. And even if these pawns are right next to our knight, we can still jump over them and go to either d6 or f6, like this. And that's an ability that only the knight has. It can jump over other pieces, and it doesn't just have to be your opponent's. Here we have 3 white pawns, and we are still going to be able to jump over these pawns and place our knight on these 2 squares. And the pieces don't have to be in front of your knight for it to jump over. They can be behind your knight, and they can be on one of the sides. So in this example here, we can jump over the rook and the bishop and place the knight either on d2 or d4. So the knight can jump over any piece, but you have to remember your opponent's knight can do exactly the same. Now, because of the way the knight moves, it can threaten a lot of other pieces without them being able to threaten the knight back. And we already know that the rook moves horizontally and vertically, and that the bishop moves on diagonals. And right now, this knight can take either this rook or this bishop, but none of them can take the knight. Now, try some exercises for yourself. Place your knight somewhere on the board and place one of your opponent's pieces on the board and try to take it without moving the opponent's piece, just your own knight. In this example, I could move my knight here to d5, and then I have a choice of moving it to b6 or f6 to be able to take the black rook here on d7. But when I move to d5, we can make it even more complicated. The rook moves vertically and horizontally, which means that the rook actually dominates this d5 square, which I just used for the knight. So instead, I could move my knight to c4 and to e5, and then be able to capture the rook on d7. Then try to put some more obstacles in your path, like this pawn here, which now hinders you from moving to e5. You will have to find a different alternative, like for example moving to b6 and then capturing on d7. One last thing to notice is that when the knight moves, it will always move from a dark square to a light square, and a dark square and to a light square. It will never move to 2 light squares or to 2 dark squares in consecutive turns.